up with fear that I'm going to throw a party and like 2 people are going to show up. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come celebrate with me. It's been a long time coming, as you'll hear in my little talk that I'm going to give here. So first, just a little bit of background on me. I wanted to be 2 things when I grew up: an English a teacher and a writer. And I just want to say, becoming an English teacher, because I, back in the day, was an English teacher, was much easier than becoming a published author, for sure. But I didn't know that when I fell in love with writing back when I was a little girl. And I used to write on anything I could get my hands on, the backs of school papers mostly. If you remember, like, the ditto sheets, you know, so I'd always, like, have my writing, and I'd write, and I'd smell. When I was little, I even started a novel, but I wrote a lot of poems and short stories and things. And in high school, I actually wrote 3 novels. And they were, for those of you who know the book The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, they were rip-offs of that. But I thought it was so good, you know, and I showed it to my friends, and I'm like, you know, but I mean, they were nice. Dawn, my sister Dawn, remembers them, I'm sure. So I wrote a bunch of short stories too, and I flirted with the idea of trying to get them published. And I even like wrote out some query letters to publishers, like editors of magazines. But I figured, you know what, I better give myself a little more time. I'm only 16. I better give myself a little more time to get better before I burn bridges. And I guess it wasn't until, I mean, you know, I went to college, put myself through college, got, you know, my financial footing under me, and it wasn't until I married Adam, where are you, Adam? That I really started thinking seriously about trying to, you know, become a published author. And so I took a writing class with Joyce Sweeney, who isn't here, but she's coming. Some of you know her. And it was like a 6-week, oh, she's not coming? Oh, okay. It was like a 6-week writing course. And then I joined a critique group, and I read this book called The Writer's Journey. Is that what it's called, Jonathan? Do you remember? Or yeah, the Hero's Journey. Yeah. The Hero's Journey. Because I was working while I wrote this book, but and he worked with me. But anyway, so I managed to write this fantasy novel that was like 400, 500 pages, and I thought it was really good until I looked into trying to get it published, and I didn't look that hard, but like the first person I actually talked to made me realize that I wasn't nearly good enough, and that the book wasn't nearly good enough. And this is where, by now I'm like in my early 30s, and life got in the way, and I stopped writing for like 7 to 10 years. And I'm going to circle back to that and tell you exactly why I stopped writing. But suffice it to say, obviously I did start writing again, and I joined another critique group, and I took every workshop I could find, and I read a ton of books on craft. And in 2015, I published my first book, a work of art. Some of you have seen it. And when this book came out, this book, my new book, was still in its very early stages. The plot was kind of floundering, and here I want to give some credit to my Tuesdays critique group, some of whom are here. Farron is here, and Kathy, and I don't know if Joyce was. Anyway, they saw both of these books in like the plot changed, the characters changed, like every week.
Made it.
But they saw both of these books in all of their stages and helped really shape the books into, you know, what they are. So thank you, Tuesdays. And the other thing that helped shape the book into what they are my own life experiences. And some of you know that this book, my first book, is about a girl who was sexually abused by her father, and a teenage girl. And even though I was sexually abused as a child, when this book came out and I was asked about it, my heart is beating, I'm sorry. When I was asked about it, I was too scared, too ashamed, humiliated to talk about it. So this was before the Me Too movement, so it was very much a taboo topic. And so people would ask me about it, and you know, I wish I had been braver. Years after this came out, I wished I had been braver, but I was too embarrassed, too humiliated, too whatever. But I told myself that if I ever got this book published, and it was, you know, it took a long time to get it published, but I told myself that if I ever did find a publisher, then I was gonna not shy away from talking about who I, you know, really am and why I wrote it. So here goes, and I'm gonna cry. Sorry. This is me being brave, and some of you already know this, but the reason I wrote a book that centers around an alcoholic is because I'm an alcoholic. And I told you before that life got in the way, and that's why I started drinking. Well, it was my alcoholism that got in the way, and it was it brought me to my knees. It almost ruined my life. But you know, it's hard to describe to somebody who's not an addict or an alcoholic how horrible, awful it is to even. You're crying, but it's making me cry, my sister. It's hard to describe how awful it is to want to quit doing something so badly and not be able to, just like be totally powerless and helpless. And obviously, I did find help, and I found a way out, and I've been in recovery for almost 18 years. So, I'm just telling you, my son isn't, I was a sober mom, but anyway, okay. So that's why this book is so personal to me. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it's personal to me because I know how hard. First of all, I know how hard it is to get sober. I've seen the struggles, and I've seen it tear families apart, and I've seen how it brings so much despair. And it's I know what it's like to care about someone who's trying to get sober, who can't get sober, and you're rooting for them, and you just want to shake them, say, what is wrong with you? But I was the same way, so it's hard to judge. But I've also known the joy of recovery, and I live that joy every day. And I see it in the meetings I go to with my sober friends, and there's nothing like it. And for that, I am so very, very grateful. And so let me just refer to my notes so I don't forget what I'm talking about here. So this book is about, it's a coming of age story. It's the tragedy of addiction, but there's a lot of hope in it. A lot of hope is what we wish for. And I just want to defer, speaking of hope, both of these books, I almost gave up on ever getting published. I wanted to be a traditionally published author, which means that you have to go through sell your book to a publisher. And in order to do that, you have to have an agent. Just like actors and actresses have agents, so do many writers. And an agent isn't going to make money from you unless they sell your book. So the first thing I had to do was find an agent. So you research agents who, in this case, I was like, what agents like dark, really dark YA books? And so there's a handful. And you write a query letter, and you introduce yourself, and you explain what your book is about, and then you say, here's the first chapter. If you like it, I can send you the whole manuscript. And so then you wait weeks, sometimes months, and as my writer friends here know, sometimes they'll get back to you and say, yeah, I like your first chapter, send me the whole thing. So you send them the whole thing, and then you wait more weeks and more months. And then with this book, I kept giving things like, it's really well written, but it's just not for us, or it's just too dark, or it's just whatever this. And this has gone on for, you have to have thick skin, but 6 to 9 months, I think I was trying to sell this, or find an agent first. And I was ready to shelve it, put it in a drawer and chalk it up as a learning experience. But I went to my writing mentor, Joyce Sweeney, some of you know. She was in my Tuesdays Writers Group. And, was kind of, well, I don't know what to do. And she's like, well, why don't you follow up on some of the agents that you queried and they never responded? And me being the insecure person I am, thought that just meant no. I didn't want to bother them. But I followed her advice, and I did some follow-up letters. And a couple days later, I got an agent wrote me back and said, yeah, I loved your first chapter. Send me the whole manuscript. So I was trying not to get my hopes up, because that had happened before many times. But I sent her the full manuscript, and a couple days later, she's like, oh my God, I love this book, and she offered to represent me. And I was like, okay, yay, I have an agent, but I'm not gonna get my hopes up, because I knew a handful of writer friends who had been agented for years and had not been able to, hadn't sold a book yet. But it was I swear, it was that same week she was able to sell the book, and I know I got lucky, but she sold the book, and I was over the moon excited. So when it came time, years later, when it came time to get ready to try to sell this book, I thought, oh, you know what, this is probably gonna be a lot easier, because I already have an agent, and I'm already a published author, and my book got really good reviews. It didn't sell well, but it got really good reviews, critically acclaimed, and won some awards. So that it won't be hard to sell this book. It was years of my agent trying to sell this book. And it came close a couple of times. Like I had an editor say, oh, I love it, and I'd like to see these changes. And I sat with her and we had a meeting, and it took me a couple weeks to do all the revisions, and I sent it to her only to find out that she had left the company to become a literary agent instead of crushed. I mean, I was so hopeful. And during those years, I switched agents, and the book went through many revisions, and I was just about to give up hope again. And now I just want to tell you a little story about those bracelets that you all got at the door. A few Christmases ago, my sister Dawn, she's sitting right there, my older sister, my best friend, she's like the coolest person I know, seriously. Anyway, she put one of those bracelets in all of her Christmas stockings. And the directions say, you know, make a wish, put on the bracelet, and when the bracelet falls off, your wish will come true. And at the time, so of course, what do I wish for? My book to be published. And at the time, I was also going through a little bit of a health scare. I had had breast cancer a few years prior to that, and I'd had the surgery and the radiation, and I had been cancer-free for a few years. But my latest mammogram and ultrasound had found something concerning. And so I had gone in for an MRI, and I was waiting for the results. And I wasn't, I wasn't like even really scared about it, because I figured it would have been caught early, whatever it was. But apparently my family was very scared. Adam told me later he was like so worried, like worried sick. And my two sisters, Eva, raise your hand, Eva, and Dawn, were scared enough that the wish that they made on their bracelet was that I would be okay. And so obviously the wishes came true, right? Now I wore this bracelet for weeks, waiting for it to fall off. And I might have tugged on it a few times, like holding up there. But it did eventually fall off. And it wasn't like, you know, my wish came true that day. But I think I got my book contract in February. So end of December is Christmas time. So, you know, it was around that age. I'm not saying these bracelets have magic powers, but, you know, take one home, you never know. So, yeah. And then, okay, so I just want to talk a little bit more about what inspired this book, besides my life experience. And that is, I was asked to go into a homeless shelter, the one over on Powerline Road by the sewage treatment plant, to tell my alcoholism and recovery story there to a group of addicts and alcoholics. So I did that, and it went really well, and I thought, you know, this could be a good setting for a book. But I know nothing about what it's like to live in a place like this or work in a place like this. So I started volunteering there. And I used to be a trained, I used to teach English. So once a week I would teach pre-GED grammar/English classes. And I'd love to say that it was purely altruistic, but it wasn't. It was part research and part altruism. But I did that for about a year, and I got to know like how the place was run more. And during that time, the director of the shelter kind of took a shine to me, and he invited me to come to one of their weekly community meetings. And it's kind of like a pep rally. They say what's all going on, and because it's like maybe 100 residents there. But anyway. And they introduced new residents, and they were introducing a mother and her teenage son. And the kid's name was Gabriel, and if you've read the book, you know Gabriel's a character in the book. It has nothing to do with this real Gabriel, because I know nothing about the real Gabriel, but this teenage kid's name was Gabriel. And I remember sitting in the meeting thinking, I wonder what this kid's life is like. Is his mom an alcoholic or an addict? Maybe, probably, since they're living here. Because a lot of them were, is he rooting for his mom? Is he like mad at her? Do his friends at school know? So that really got the seed of writing the book going. And when I started writing it, I made it a girl instead of a boy, because obviously I'm a girl, and I relate better to that. But, and Layla is very much based on me. Like her, I was poor growing up. And like Layla, I was very insecure, and I tried to project this attitude of, I don't care what you think of me, I'm cool, I'm emo, I read poetry, but I did care very much what people thought of me. And like I said, Layla wrote poetry, and I wrote poetry as a teen. And the reason I wrote poetry is because, and again, Dawn, I'm sorry to call you out, but Dawn is 3 years older than me, and when she was a senior in high school, I was a freshman. She is my hero, has always been my hero. She is so cool, and still the coolest person I know. But she used to write poetry, and her poetry was really good. And she at school, she made what she called the poetry shirt. It was this white sweatshirt, and it was covered in like graffiti style of lines of her poetry written in different colored Sharpie. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And I don't know if other kids liked it or thought it was cool. You probably didn't care, but I thought it was the coolest thing. So in my book, Layla has a poetry shirt, and it's a t-shirt because she lives in Florida. It's not a sweatshirt, and it's written covered with lines of her favorite poems, which happen to be some of my favorite poems, because she's too insecure about her poetry to write her poems on her shirt. And that's the other thing about the poetry in here. Each of these chapters begins with a little piece of a poem written by Layla. The first one is, I clenched my teeth, hold my breath, the cry caught like a speck of dust in a spider's web, and called SOS. But each chapter begins with a little piece of a poem, and most of those poems were written when I was a teenager. And I have my little journal poetry books that I wrote here, and they're kind of cool because I was looking here. This one says Melody Alder, that's my maiden name, Christmas 1984, and I even decorated them. I had those little stick-on gold letters. This used to say A New Feeling, because the first poem in the anthology, my anthology, was called A New Feeling. And they're dated, and I even gave them star ratings and things. And I went through a sonnet writing phase. You'll see some of the sonnets in here. And so, like I said, most of these poems from Layla were actually poems that I wrote as a teen. So I find that kind of cool that my teenage poems, especially because when I submitted them to an anthology at my high school, the head of the English department told me they were too filled with teenage angst. Which is what Layla also hears from somebody at her high school, so she's very afraid to show them to people. So I just thought that was kind of a cool thing that my high school, my poems were published. So I think that's pretty much all I had to say, which is why the poetry thing, there's a magnetic poetry board over here. So I encourage you to put the poem together, take a picture of it, because it's probably going to get messed up by the person who comes behind you. And I'd love to see them if you want to send them to me. We also have books for sale. 15% of the earnings on these books go to this branch of the Friends of the Library. And I'm going to add to that just because I like to promote libraries. And also, after this, I'm going to be making a donation to the Broward Outreach Center, which is where I used to volunteer teach. And if you're interested in doing that, I can tell you how to do that or put you in touch with their website. I know they also like volunteers. They have their big Thanksgiving outreach thing coming up, which is a chapter in this book. Layla and her family go and volunteer at their big Thanksgiving outreach. And when I volunteered there, I worked at the snow cone booth, and you'll see that people, and that's what Layla does, she works at the snow cone booth. So there's that. Obviously there's food and drink. We have fun photo booth back there with my nieces, Bella and Mina, and they'll, there's props and they'll text them to you. And my nephew, who's not here, he's really talented. He did a frame around the picture, and it has the book title and scene, so it's kind of cool. I think it's cool. And then what else? Oh, I guess I should do the raffle, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So did everybody put their ticket in? Oh, let me do it.